guys?
Oh, we are.
A little premature.
A little early, sorry, guys.
All right, anybody?
We got Peacock, should be here still.
Okay.
Yes, I grabbed a couple of these. Is that what you're doing? That what we're doing?
I didn't know where.
It's so long since I've been here since the renovations. I went
It's awesome.
this fast, figured I'd go upstairs.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
Another one.
You know, it's in there. But this is-
Wi-Fi here.
Oh, my.
The guests, need to do the display.
They can hire res than we do.
They definitely do.
Oh, town office.
There you go, Joe.
Yeah, but you know, sometimes high resolution isn't good.
It is,
No,
you know, exactly.
Way too high resolution.
Good thing I'm looking pretty fuzzy, so that's good.
Yeah, that you gotta have
Yeah. In disguise.
only chance for that.
I know.
You guys were a chatty group.
Now it kind of faded out, didn't we?
Oh, give us a minute.
That's what I'm afraid.
See, our usual telepresence is just this really wide shot from far, far away.
This is a little too close.
Yeah, this is. Yeah,
Little too
no, it hit the pancakes before coming over. Speak for the whole council. I have a better face for radio than.
Started.
Oh. All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. We all set? Okay. This is a welcome to our workshop on discussion of the next steps to police consolidation. And I think at this point, we can turn it over to Dave and Chris.
I have just a short presentation for PowerPoint. I think you're gonna put it on both. Yep. Okay. This is really an open discussion though, so as I go through my proposal, please interrupt me and have side conversations. So it more is just gonna outline kind of what I've put together, which I think you've all had a copy of now and seen electronically. But so I'm David Kearns, I'm the police chief. And just thank everybody for being here tonight. I know it's summertime and it's July. A lot of stuff going on, so I appreciate taking the time to have a joint meeting and an off week from meeting to vote town council and select board. So this is just a brief overview as we've gone through the last 13 years. we've kind of had these conversations in the past. Chris Worth and I, we talked a lot earlier on this year. As far as putting a proposal together, we met with both town managers. It was early spring and just kind of had the conversation, said, is this appropriate? So we kind of put our heads together, and the proposal that you're going to see today is kind of what we've come up with. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history on the combined services of how we've got to this point. So 2013, the town of Bar Harbor contracted with the chief or the town of Mount Desert to share chief agreement, which was a temporary thing, 6 months. That actually rolled into the end of the fiscal year. By the time July rolled around, Bar Harbor said, we're going to have our ducks in a row. We want to continue. We want another 8 months. And so that took us to the end of that calendar year in 13, where we were truly sharing police services from the chief's level, both PDs operating independently. As we roll down around to the calendar year in 2014 or 15, excuse me, it was decided that probably we could take a look at just seeing what we could do as far as keeping this as a long-term arrangement. And that first year that we went into, started seeing some of what we could work through collaboratively for law enforcement services, both Bar Harbor and Mount Desert. And there was, in that first year, there was really no true intention to ever combine the agencies into one or continue to do what we're doing. It was just, how can we better operate as neighboring agencies to provide police services? After we got through that first year, we kind of recognized that there was quite a bit of efficiencies that we probably could accomplish by having Mount Desert's police force and Bar Harbor's police force start working a little bit more in hand as far as day-to-day operations. And those first years, we really had to work through mutual aid agreements that we had in place. It truly only caused or gave us authority in each other's town when true emergencies existed and all resources were exhausted. And so we updated that mutual aid agreement for both towns to basically keep it consistent and free flowing. So at any point, either police force could operate in the other towns without request or without resources being exhausted. And some of those first years were really just, if there was an extended illness or somebody was on vacation, we started looking at where we could not worry about tapping out a 5-man agency to fill 40 hours of overtime in a week. And Bar Harbor had more overtime details than what we had staff for. So we really started to try to consolidate and go, okay, maybe we can start sharing some of this resources to help alleviate the pressures on the own internal organization. As we continue to expand, we realized that really, patrolling each other's areas was not that big of a deal. I mean, we're close enough. So we really kind of expanded upon that and kind of erased the line to a certain extent and created 3 patrol zones. And the historical minimum level staffing for Mount Desert was always one guy, or one officer. You had one officer in town 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Bar Harbor was 2 officers minimum staffing, same thing. And so now we currently have that same minimum staffing level as we did way back then and we have today, where we run 3 minimum, but that doesn't mean they're isolated to the town lines of Bar Harbor and Mount Desert. And so our patrol zones really are Northeast Harbor, which expands out to Otter Creek and out towards the high school. You have in-town Bar Harbor, goes out as far as Hulls Cove, and then Hulls Cove that actually kind of wraps around the Bedroom community of MDI to the head of the island and back down towards Hulls Port. And so those were things that we kind of accomplished in those first years formatively of saying, okay, how can we improve efficiencies and response times and making sure that we're providing the service that we did. And so that was kind of in that first couple of years. And so that was really 2016. And as we went into 2017, which was the first 2-year agreement, because it was working pretty well, we had chief sharing goals where we had said that we'd share an administrative assistant and develop a little bit more depth within the police department to have a true second in command for what we were operating at the time. But those going back to 2017 with the first internal conversations that we had as a police organization saying, maybe there's something bigger here. Maybe we could look at singular employment. Maybe we could expand upon, you know, our radio network, our phone infrastructure, just all of that. So we had those conversations, well, yeah, 2017. But they never really transpired anything other than internally. Like we talked about it, but there wasn't a whole lot of pressure from either community to do anything different than what we had been doing. And so that really rolled into 2019. We had another 1-year agreement. In 2020 and 22, we had another 2-year agreement. But realizing that we needed some change within how we were working as an organization, chief sharing agreement left it a little bit vague that if the chief was permanently or temporarily unavailable, the agreement would just wash and everybody would go back to the way it was. And we're like, we need to at least tighten that up to make sure that we have a continuity of operation for what we were doing at that time. And that's the first year. Moving into 2022, we came back to the boards and wrapped in a second in command, the true second in command for the organization to be funded and shared across both towns. And that really built some structure and stability into the agreement rather than just basically it hinging on one person and it kind of falling apart if something. So at 2023, 2022, we actually went into a 5-year agreement. And during this time, Chief Willis retired. But we had built the redundancy in the agreement that basically I would take over as acting, or the captain would. And then I was selected as the chief in 2023. So we opened up the agreement, we took out all the names rather than it being any individual and just really focused on what the organization should look like, regardless of who's sitting in these positions, to make sure that it functions fluidly for both towns. And at that point, we also included the mental health liaison, as well as the dispatch supervisor, we now call it public safety operations coordinator. So next slide. So this current slide, this is what we have currently for shared staff. So police chief, captain, police services operations coordinator, administrative assistant Karen Richter, who's right behind me for those that don't know her, and then our mental health liaison. And so that's our current model, and we cost share those between the two towns and pay it out once a year, swapping the money back and forth. So going back to those original conversations in 2017, we actually have Sarah Gould in the audience today. She's attorney, town's attorney. But we really broached the topic about probably not the best practice for what we're doing, where we have two police organizations sharing supervision, sharing staff, policing two towns, and it was advised that we probably should straighten it out back then, and we kind of decided, not at the organizational level, but at the board level, that it was working pretty good and we're just going to continue to do it, knowing there's risk there, but not truly. We mitigated as much as we could, but knew that there's still risks there. So I didn't know if you could just elaborate, kind of going back to those older conversations.
Sure. So this was a good job for my memory too. My name is Sarah Newell. I have represented the town of Mount Desert in these communications and these negotiations and reviewing agreements. I believe since the first chief sharing agreement. And so initially, the first chief sharing agreement was pretty simple, pretty normal, the pretty much an employee leasing agreement, no real issues. And then as we went further and further, I did raise further concerns about potential liability when you're sharing a more significant number of employees and you're starting to share services in such a way where you are covering those human resources services, those payroll services, those sorts of things for groups of employees that are employed by two different employers. And so at the time, some of the liability that I pointed out that was starting to concern me was that some, there are instances, first of all, where things happen and we don't know who's liable for them. When you have employees who are working sort of in such a shared collaborative manner. And so that was a concern that I had. And then the other concern that comes up sometimes with these things is related to joint employer relationships or integrated employer relationships. Sorry, I can see some people can't see me. I'll stand so you can see me. Joint employer or integrated employer relationships. So all the federal and state employment statutes that we deal with all the time, like Family and Medical Leave and Maine Labor Relations Act and FLSA and all of these things, all of them have a standard for when you determine that two employers actually are joint employers and have joint employees. And so then they get counted in a certain way under those laws. And some of that has to do with direction and control and shared human resources services. So those were some of the issues that I was starting to think, well, we could have issues with that. Now, of course, it worked very well operationally. And we did try to mitigate for some of those risks in the way that we drafted the agreements as we went through. And so, you know, my job was to give the advice and to tell you the risks. And then sometimes people move forward with and are comfortable with some level of risk, but that's sort of where we were then.
So currently shared services between the two towns, that mutual aid agreement that we tweaked for both towns way back, that stands. It hasn't changed at all. It's just as fluid as it was from when we started. It gives us that prosecutorial and authority coverage when we're taking cases to court. So there's no confusion or confliction as far as whether somebody had the authority to enforce the laws in a certain jurisdiction. Supervision, this was unique from the beginning because we had two police organizations that worked as two separate police organizations. So you had a command structure within each that was appropriate for one agency. So when we actually started combining and sharing patrol zones and supervision, it provided us with a lot more latitude as far as making sure there was a supervisor on shift that was responsible for the actions patrol officers patrolling that day or evening. So, and because we had so much command staff that we kind of threw into the pool for supervision, it allowed us to get supervision for both communities for 18 to 20 hours a day. To mean you have a supervisor on the ground in one of these two towns for 18 to 20, and neither PD had that prior to this. And it just that we weren't big enough as separate agencies to make sure that you had supervision. There's always somebody on the other end of the phone that you could call if patrol officer needed a question answered, and that was covered. But to truly have somebody here that was functioning on the ground is make sure the shift operates appropriately. So, and that has expanded, and through attrition and retirement, I think we've got a pretty good span of control now and really kind of tailored our chain of command to be the one agency that we're operating as now. Over time, uniforms and insignia, we've really changed, and I think we're all at this point look identical to each other. We have a shared patch that has Bar Harbor and Mount Desert on it. Most recently, this July, we just switched to a new badge that has Bar Harbor and Mount Desert on it. In the early days, we had different looking cars. Those have all been rebranded for Bar Harbor, Mount Desert, and the internal workings of them. Not that anybody here would know, but if you get into any one of the cars, they are going to look exactly the same, and equipment's all laid out exactly the same. And more for operations as we move forward. So no matter what vehicle they were getting into, whether it was Bar Harbor, Mount Desert car, all operated the same. So records management system, in 2016, we actually were operating two separate records management systems. We made it a little bit hard to do what we were doing because you would have to log into the other agencies, law enforcement, records management to type a report, whether you were in Bar Harbor or Mount Desert. 2016, we switched all over to Spillman and really have become one virtual agency as far as the court's concerned and the state's concerned for anything that we're doing. So that is a current shared service that both pay for it out of their respective operating budgets, but we're all on the same system operating as one agency. We talked already about the prosecutorial district. Radio frequencies early on, we realized, again, being on two separate radio frequencies wasn't always the best. So we actually had a frequency that the county had provided us, that we provided the equipment for, which was frequency was big enough to cover both jurisdictions. That was 2016 that we actually started using that. So all of our radio transmissions were on one radio frequency for two departments operating as one. And same thing, so dispatch, which I didn't touch on before and I meant to, we've really, even though we've talked a lot about patrol, we've really started creating redundancies between the two towns as far as the radio consoles, what frequencies are in there, who can tone out fire from where. Most recently, I say recently, it's been over a year at this point, we created fiber line or fiber connection to Bar Harbor for downstairs. So all of our radio frequencies that are on each of the consoles are tied together. And so even though there's two consoles here and two in Bar Harbor, they really operate as a 4-unit console. And whether you're here in Mount Desert and want to tone out Bar Harbor fire, or in Bar Harbor and want to tone out Mount Desert fire, it all works the same. And most recently this spring, we actually consolidated the phone network for internal transfer of calls and the ability to switch, we call it hot desk. But if this is not staffed down here or it's not staffed over there, they simply type in a code and they take all the calls for both towns seamlessly. So the redundancy on that side of it, we planned out in capital improvement for years, and just actually that came to fruition in the spring. So so this is the current staffing levels for both Bar Harbor and Mount Desert. So there's 16 sworn officers in Bar Harbor, 4 in Mount Desert. 4 dispatch personnel for both towns. We have 1 administrative assistant who works for command staff, and then we have 3 support personnel in Bar Harbor, and that's our parking manager, who's also shared ACO for the 2 towns, an assistant harbor master for Bar Harbor, as well as a mental health liaison. And I say he's assistant harbor master, he also does a lot of PD administrative functions as far as getting court paperwork processed and out to the DA's office. So he is a harbor master assistant, but he also does a lot of work with the department and that as well. So the personal integration plan, we really talked about, this is taking those 8 Mount Desert employees and bringing them over to Bar Harbor. I had conversations at the town manager level prior to putting the proposal together. And Mount Desert, I don't think was prepared to bring on all of the Bar Harbor employees, so it made it a smoother transition to just have 8 go the other direction. And really this is to acclimate the payroll and benefits for the officers and dispatchers that are working. And this is something that we've struggled with for a long time, even as much as we've tried to get it down to the penny. Having 2 different towns and personnel rules that you play by for each of the employees or group of employees that you're working with, it's a little bit convoluted from the administrative part. And as much as I tried this year, knowing what the salary survey for Mount Desert was going to do to get them, I had them down to a penny. And when it was all said and done, there was 61 cents difference. So it's not like it's a huge issue as far as pay, but you could very much have 2 officers that have the same tenure and time of service on working for 2 different towns on the same call together, making different rates of pay, different benefits. And it's noticeable to them. It hasn't become a problem for us. And I think that's part due to our culture and what everybody's bought into for the organization, how we're operating. But from an administrative point from the organization, to fix that alignment and get it right so it's consistent and equitable for everybody is super important to me. And then just reducing the administrative redundancy. A lot of time and effort that Karen has spent over the years of keeping track of overtime shifts and mutual aid and who's responsible for what and billing back and forth. We've billed a lot of money back and forth between the 2 towns, which probably has resulted in more time spent for us and cost of doing business than what it truly was for the 2 towns. So some of this proposal has to do with increased efficiencies on that level to make sure that it's done correctly as well. Yep, you're good. And so I guess the bigger point to operational continuity. Regardless of what you as the elected officials for the two towns decide. Whether we proceed forward with this or we don't, you're not gonna see an outward facing change in anything that we're doing. It's gonna look exactly the same. And I think that's important to restate because I don't want anybody to think that there's gonna be this major change because we're doing this. It really is gonna be all on the back end of making sure that pay rates and benefits and personnel rules, as far as the employees are concerned, are consistent. So the organizational structure is gonna remain the same, the chain of command will remain the same. And our community engagement, we take great pride in making sure that we are out in both communities, other than just getting calls for service. To respond to make sure that we're engaging with the communities, whether it be coffee with the cob, the community barbecues, and just get out, so we're out in the public and people can engage with the police department. Before, a bad day comes and they have to call on us for service, so. I touched briefly already on the personnel policies and benefits, to acclimate those. The dispatch and communication coordination. We're kind of already there. We have been short-staffed in Bar Harbor for a little while. We currently have a dispatcher that is a Mount Desert employee that is now working all of his hours in Bar Harbor. Just basically because of the schedule that we've done and overlap. I think it came up maybe in our executive session, we talked about if anybody had any concerns from the employees of Mount Desert transition employment status to Bar Harbor. I touched base with all of them, and I think I haven't heard anything. I think actually they're a little bit excited to think that we've gone as long as we have the way we were, and now there's a transition. I've assured them as we work through this, I will make sure that they are made whole in the transfer. To not lose longevity, not lose any of the unfunded liability, whether it be sick time, comp time, any of that, to make sure that that's carried with them. So there truly is there's nobody being not made whole as a transition would occur. And I have not got that deep into it to make sure that we've got to that point yet, because I wanted to make sure that we were here to have this conversation before we really dug in. But overall, they're very much embracing what we're trying to do. So financially and budgetary, again, like I just said, I haven't really got into a lot of this. I think there are some potential insurance and liability shifts. By one town not having the employees under their umbrella anymore and shifting it to the other town. The cost sharing rebalance. When we look at the current chief sharing agreement, which is 60-40. I think was based upon Jim Willis's time that he spent in each town. I think that's how the calculation came out. I'm not saying that's right or wrong or needs to be adjusted, but it kind of was an arbitrary figure on how much percentage of his time when he was doing shared sheep stuff that he would be in one town and the other, and I think that's how the cost share broke down. So I think we probably need to kind of look at that again and figure out exactly what that looks like and what's equitable for both towns if we decide to move forward. And that just a transition cost if we find that there's a rebalance that needs to happen. And if we were to do this, I'm thinking that these are the phases that we would have just kind of that administrative preparation phase. To get us aligned and figure out all the discrepancies between where the personnel rules aren't really in line, what benefits for one town are not with the other town. And just kind of work out and iron out all those figures. The personnel integration phase, I think, is really just more of an onboarding process for the employees that would be leaving employment with one town and moving to the other, just to make sure that they're feeling comfortable and that transition strategy happens, so they're felt and they're heard with any concerns that they may have, and then basically just be full integration. And just to conclude, these are the benefits that we see as internal on the organization, and I understand that just because we operate as a combined agency doesn't mean that it's the best thing for the citizens of each community to look at this proposal and say that's a great idea. as we've moved forward over the years, this is the next logical step that we haven't taken. And I think it's time that we really look at it and address, these issues moving forward if we want to continue to operate in this fashion. And I told you to interrupt me and I talk consistently, so. So if you have any questions or open to discussion, or we can sit back and you can talk amongst yourselves and we'll just be here to listen and answer questions that you have.
Okay, so I have 4 questions.
Sure.
They're all about money,
Okay.
well, mostly. Okay, come budget time, what are we gonna be looking at in our spreadsheet? Okay, what are we gonna be looking at 2 budgets, one that we're paying and one that?
I assume they would look very similar to what you're looking at right now. So in the operational line for the budget, there's a contracted services to Bar Harbor. After I was hired on as the chief, because there was the flip-flop between who would employ the chief, that's why we opened the agreement up again. So that contracted services line, you saw a jump in that because that's my salary being paid out to Bar Harbor. And I assume that it would, and May's not here tonight, but Dylan, maybe you can answer the question. I assume it would be very consistent in how the budget already looks. That line would just absorb all of the personnel and benefit costs that would be associated with it, and it would just be contract service to Bar Harbor. We would still maintain a police operating budget, which would take care of capital improvement for cruisers and radio equipment and building, all of that. So you still would have in my vision, at this point, you would still have a Mount Desert Police Department and communications budget, just with that money pulled out, put back to that contracted services line.
And just one quick one, so when we bring the hourly rate to parity, okay, where's that money come from? So I'm assuming we go up.
Yeah, so it's 61 cents less in Mount Desert than it is in Bar Harbor right now per hour. So, and I think that's where we get into those, we really need to break down and get into the cost sharing, figure out what that financial responsibility is.
Yeah, but for the remainder of this budget year.
Well, and I think that's the other question too, is if you wanted to do it now, I'm not sure.
Okay.
If you wanted to wait until the beginning of a fiscal year, we could do that as well. The one thing I did not talk about in here, I alluded to it with the pay and benefits, the retirement plans have actually changed. And Bar Harbor has the 3C, which I believe Mount Desert was preparing to go to or transition to. So those employees would be left in flux. Like if they switch to employers, I've talked with Maine first about this, but there's a way to capture them and make them whole in that transition. So, but I think there's a lot of moving parts and pieces as far as cost of where that comes from and timeframes as far as when it would do what we do.
Anybody else? Yeah, Rodney?
When you say make whole, like if they're gonna leave Mount Desert and go to Bar Harbor and be employed, are they gonna be like a new employee, or will they be able to bring that, like if they've been here already 10 years, will they be able to?
That's our vision, is that a 10-year employee here would not lose anything as far as any of their longevity with the town of Mount Desert. It would all carry them over to Bar Harbor. I think that's only fair if those employees, and how, because they haven't really, I won't say they don't have a choice, but this is something that we've done, or proposal that we've put together to say this makes more efficiency sense for us as an organization. So to have them penalized anyway for that, not fair.
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think we should do it.
So I have other questions, because I wanted to tell people when they approach me.
Sure.
One is, will there be any agency here in this building remaining?
Yes.
There will be.
Yes, so right now we just got full staffed again with dispatch, so we've increased our hours over here. But right now we're running 8 AM to 8 PM. For 7 days a week, so dispatch, there will always be somebody here. We cannot, unless we have one facility that is centrally located, I still need operations to run out of here. It's just not efficient to be running out of one PD or the other. So both PDs would still have house patrol and office space.
So is anyone working on the vision for a central PD?
we talked about that in 2017 was the first conversations we've had. We haven't really got that far as buying a place and then finding the money to construct said place.
I had a question about, I mean, maybe this is just, I don't know, projecting, but if all the police officers are technically employees of the town, and let's say somewhere down the road, the officers get sued for something. God forbid, there's some bad interaction that takes place. And the towns, both of us want to be involved in that. You know, how is there a vision on how the legal costs of either defending or paying out some, because we see it every day in the news. Has that been considered, how that would work?
Yes, but I was gonna say, that's why I brought her tonight.
So I think that the way that that work is if these employees are employees of Bar Harbor and we have an agreement between the two communities. Generally, that agreement would include some sorts of indemnification provisions, some sorts of proof of insurance provisions, and a provision that would list the town of Mount Desert as an additional insured under Bar Harbor's insurance policies. So from a liability standpoint, I think all of that would be covered by agreements. I do think if they're employees of Bar Harbor, the town of Mount Desert will have less control over that litigation and also less potential problems as a result of that litigation. So but yeah, there are mechanisms to ensure that that liability is handled.
So, I'm sorry, essentially, and just to lay this out, you're saying that Bar Harbor and Mount Desert would technically be co-defendants if something would like to happen.
Do you mean now?
Well, no, I mean, if something, like you said, a lawsuit or something came up, they'd be represented.
So they could be, I mean, a person could choose to attempt to sue both communities but I think there would be different liabilities potentially for both communities. So if you're the employer of an employee who has injured someone or taken that act, then that's a certain type of liability. We have direct liability for that. I would think if Mount Desert had contracted with the town of Bar Harbor to provide services, then that liability is a little different and the duties a little different. Like, did we fulfill our duties to ensure that the town of Mount Desert the town of Bar Harbor was doing that in the correct way? So you might be co-defendants, you might not. It might just be the town of Bar Harbor that sued. It would depend on the circumstances. But certainly there'd be insurance coverage for.
But it seems like it would be implied though, doesn't it? Because just because the Bar Harbor is employed, they're already Bar Harbor Mount Desert on the badges of the cars. Isn't it kind of implied? I mean, that they would have, Mount Desert would have a responsibility or vice versa.
I mean, I think so. I think you have some responsibilities as the party that's contracting for those services. Right now, I think you're in a situation where it's a little less clear. That's like where the liability is.
Thank you.
I guess we'll let Phil talk. It's
Yeah, might as well have I'm the only citizen here tonight other than anyone from the press. I'm Phil Lichtenstein, I chair the warrant committee, so I've looked at the budgets all the way through ever since the cost sharing started. I want to commend everyone on both towns for doing a really good job and the personnel. I've heard very good questions tonight. I think, again, we have funding, I think is what we have a lot of people that what doesn't make sense. All right, we want to end that. Are we going to still fund 4 officers and 2 dispatch and the 3 support personnel in our line? Like what John was asking, how would it look in a budget? I think, once that's clear, I think it would be very easy to sell to the citizens. I don't think we're selling things. We're trying to create clarity. That's the thing I've heard from Dave all night. So I really appreciate Dave. Thank you.
I follow that up with one I meant to say to begin with. It makes me feel very, very good to have the communication and the clear concern for the people that work under you and for the citizens of both these towns and for how important your job is and to seemingly be in full command of like who you need to reach out to. And I'm really impressed and I'm really pleased. So thank you.
I was gonna say that.
Yeah, I was too, we were all gonna say that.
I'm sure you didn't do it alone.
I was gonna say that before I asked my question too. Should be commended. Thank you. No, it's a lot of work and it seems like every base is covered. But I'd be remiss not to ask this, especially on behalf of the Bar Harbor voters, where it says Bar Harbor may assume increased financial responsibility. Can you expound upon that at all?
Well, I think that more goes down to with insurance and being on the health trust, and I guess I'll default a little bit to you because we kind of talked that through a little bit too, that there may be an additional cost.
Well, I think it's gonna come down to the devil's always in the detail. And so what we would see is, we'd probably see an increase in our insurance coverage cost. And we would just want to make sure that there is an even distribution of those shared expenses. So as the gentleman from the audience had pointed out, you have a set number of staff in already that you're covering. And so, we would just figure out what that cost share difference is on our insurance. And we'd say, look, this is our new insurance rate. We think this is the equitable distribution dessert. And we would want to just formalize that, and that we're providing the level of coverage and personnel that you expect for services as you're currently getting. And that we're not disproportionately subsidizing those services as well. But I think that can be done once we understand the sentiment of both councils and communities as to if this is a process worth pursuing.
So essentially, any increase for Bar Harbor, you're saying that there could be a pathway towards making that equitable across the board.
The same way we are right now within the command share and structure, right? We've determined like this is the pro rata share for each community for that service.
Yeah, and I think transitionally wise over the years, we've gone back and adjusted those if one seemed like it was out of whack from the other or subsidizing one community to the other, and try to adjust that and make it right. So first shot at it, we might not get it right, but I think the idea that we would consistently look at that moving forward to make sure that it's not.
I just think when voters see that, we just want to make sure they have absolute clarity on that.
I think I've seen the results, and I think the additional resources both communities get living on Eagle Lake Road. Because every once in a while, there's like 4 sirens heading into Bar Harbor and 4 sirens heading out of Bar Harbor. So that it's, before it was probably just one lonely set of blue lights going by. So I think that's great. And the way that you found the ways to consolidate and to make it more professional and work over the years. It's like Robert Frost said about fog, it arrives on land on little cat's feet. And, rather than this big consolidation plan and everything else. Carl Sandburg, excuse me. I stopped in my woods on snow evening. I didn't know. Anyway, so I think it's great that we've gotten to this point. And you mentioned about it says Bar Harbor, Mount Desert Police and badges. And 20 years from now, are the patches going to say Bar Harbor, Mount Desert, Southwest Harbor / Tremont? And so at what point do you just call it Mount Desert Island Police? Is this an opportunity to do that now too?
Not yet.
Probably for a while. Whole other ballgame.
No, and I'm not saying it's bringing them into the fold right now, but I mean, just call them out to MDI Police.
What the beginning of what you were talking about is why I think why this is working is because it took so long, right? It's been this slow iteration of trying to figure out what works and what doesn't and how to make it better, and not just going all in overnight and consolidating everything. So like each community, I think, still feels like we have a police force and a community presence and a say in that, which I think is a credit to these guys for the work that they've done, like really caring about the work that they're doing and the people that are working for them. And I think if we're going to try to bring the whole island together, there's something to learn from that, right? Like, how do you start to do that slowly, in a way that so that you can continue to like create that identity for those communities and the resources too? Because I think when you go all into this, like if we had started with this, we probably wouldn't have done it. I bet it would have been so much and so overwhelming, and there would have been fear in that. But here we are now because of the care and time. So I wonder about that, like, is there a way to like kind of look at why this is working and why this worked? And how
And
this
I'm not
worked?
advocating to try to wrap everybody into it all at once, but I'm just saying at some point, it isn't really one town or the other anymore. It's two towns together, so.
Yeah, but over 8 years, you know, right? Like it's taken a while, right? Just sort of figure out how to do that and how to make that feel comfortable to themselves.
Well, yeah, and I wouldn't be telling you the truth if I didn't say that there was growing pains in this. This was not as smooth as it looks like on the surface.
Yeah.
But over the time, the people that didn't buy into what we were doing moved along and went their other directions. We employed new employees that have embraced it wholeheartedly. Like, huge credit to the staff that works for me, because we couldn't be where we are without them buying into the program, because it truly would have broke. So.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea. I think, you built a lot of trust in the community and the hard work that you guys have done. It just really shows. And I, like these folks said, it's really nice to hear you validate your employees and try to make a level playing field for everybody. That's really important for just consistency and just morale. Is there a way, I think we're all, it feels like anyway, that we're all pretty much in agreement that we should, proceed to the next step. Is there a way we can model out the costs of this maybe for a future meeting so we can kind of see what this looks like? Who knows, there might be some cost savings for all of us. But it would be nice to kind of see that.
Yeah, and I think that's completely realistic, the next step, and we didn't go that far, we didn't want to waste time and resources if it was cheap or not, so.
Yeah, novel content.
Yeah, Joe has a great idea.
Yeah, but you guys did a great job. I mean, thank you. And if you can trim administrative costs, make things easier, communication easier, and things to flow better, obviously that's a savings in itself. So, but, yeah.
Thank you. Great presentation. I want to backtrack to the liability question just because, like Steve said, I think people will ask, and sorry if I missed it. If an incident were to happen in Mountain Desert, like what would that look like? How, and there was a lawsuit, for example, like what would that look like? What would that divide look like? Because I am worried about the financial burden being on Bar Harbor fully. And I know that there's insurance coverage, but yeah, if you could give, obviously it's a made up thing, but if you could give a example of what that might play out.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very hard to say because any situation that occurs is very fact sensitive, right? And so it will depend a lot on the facts as to whether both towns are named in such a situation. So, you could have a circumstance where an action takes place with an officer who's an employee of Bar Harbor and a plaintiff sues only Bar Harbor. Because it's related very much to those specific actions. There may be a situation where something occurs and it's related to both personnel and location and upkeep of, equipment and, different things. So I do think there's circumstances where one town could be sued or the other, or both towns could be sued. Both towns would of course maintain general liability insurance. And so in general, those, in general, either town would be covered for any sort of that. There are sometimes arguments between insurance companies about which town bears the most responsibility or which insurance company should settle that. That oftentimes does not have an increased cost necessarily to one of the towns at the time. That's an insurance company fight, but you do sometimes have increased costs for insurance coverage after you've had some sort of an incident, which I do think if those sorts of increased costs could be considered as part of the cost agreement and the cost sharing agreement. But it's hard to say, not knowing the exact facts of what's occurred, but I would see you might have situations where there'd be arguments between insurance companies.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I obviously it was a what if with no details. But I think, yeah, and whatever the cost sharing agreement that we come to, I think it would just be reassuring for especially the residents of Bar Harbor to know that if something were to happen, we wouldn't be kind of out in the blowing in the wind around, but
Just one last point to follow up on that, and I realize everything is relative, every case is different, everything, like you said, fact related. But if all the officers are Bar Harbor officers, does that not just put Bar Harbor immediately at the forefront of any case that would come up? I mean, we'd be right at the front of it every time, correct?
So, yeah, anything that would happen with one of your employees would be, it would be the most reasonable plaintiff in a case like that, right?
I would agree, yes.
Excuse me, has it been thought about just consolidating the insurance, have one insurance for both towns?
And so I'm not well versed in insurance, but I don't know that an insurance carrier would agree to a policy for both towns. Generally, I think what happens, and now I'm like, I didn't know enough to be dangerous, so I shouldn't answer questions like this, but generally what happens is you have a policy with one town and then they agree that the other town's an additional insured under the policy. So that they are covered, but it's one entity that has the policy.
And one of the things I like about this plan, which I think is very well thought out and well presented, as everyone has already said, but I'll say it too, is that we understand going into it, it's gonna need to be tweaked from time to time, and then we're gonna have to make adjustments. We're learning as we go, as we have all along. But I think we can cover these things as they come up. And we'll learn as we go.
Well, and I think on the insurance question, I think there has to be some contractual language between the communities as to how we divvy up those liabilities. You know, obviously, you know, if we proceed with this, Mount Desert's not going to pay the insurance bill directly. We're going to be paying that, but we can have a relationship that says this is your share of those costs, you know, pro rata. So if our rates go up because there's an incident, you know, that agreement should cover those increases so that it's continually evenly dispersed between the communities' share of that liability.
I think you answered this for us already, but if it'll be written in somehow, so if we find out this is just a disaster, we can start all over, right? We can.
18 months.
Yeah. No, yeah,
I don't think it will be.
No, no, it's a good question. And I think we talked in an executive session a little bit about that, but the idea that we should build something in that for some reason, if Mount Desert decided that they wanted to have their own police department and start building upon that, and that we have some sort of parachute clause that said we need X number of months, years to pull it apart. Honestly, our agreement right now is, I think it says 18 months, which we've got so much combined together at this point to pull it apart. We'd be all of 18 months pulling it apart. So, but I think that's important to have in there. So that way each community feels like there's an out for some reason. If something goes terribly wrong and we feel like we need to separate and do our own thing, but we can make sure that that's in there for sure.
I think it's a good idea. It's a long time coming, I believe.
I just want to point out something that Jim Willis, one of the driving factors for this whole thing originally was that we needed to develop a larger police department so we could attract talent and retain talent. And I think the idea of going backwards and dividing the two departments would be the wrong direction. Anyway.
And in credit to that statement, I think I've always said it's really hard to put culture on a job ad and have everybody go, oh, that's great. I believe we've done that here. We have great retention. We've had the ability to recruit, to be full staffed at this point, both with patrol and dispatch. And like I said, my employees make my job way easier. Like, yes, this is difficult to come and talk in front of all you, but in the same sense, they're makes it work. So, and I always want to make sure we take care of them and whatever we decide to do.
Many of your officers able to live on the island?
We've got a handful. The majority are probably off island, but we have six or eight.
Yeah, I think it's 6 or 8.
6 or 8.
Yeah.
So out of the 34, there's probably 6 to 8 that live on the island. And that's one of those things too with, we just put forward, an adjustment for wage for patrol of our harbor. Because we slid behind a little bit and we have to be comparable enough for all the communities that they live in and drive through to come here. And like I said, culture is great, but it also doesn't put food on the table and oil in your tank. So it's that idea that if we want to recruit and retain and have the best of the best, we need to compensate appropriately. So I think we're doing a great job at this point, and a credit to all of you, so.
Oh, any other discussion?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Motion to adjourn,
So moved.
Second.
all in favor?